Welcome back to Market on Close. I'm Marley Caden. We're going to direct our attention now to Tesla, which has certainly been volatile, and we're constantly talking about it. But this week, just down 6% in just the last 3 days. So to continue our conversation, let's welcome in Ross Gerber, the president and CEO of Gerber Kawasaki Wealth and Investment Management. Ross, thanks for being with us today. Lots to talk about when it comes to Tesla. But I think I'd like to kick things off to get your thoughts on Elon Musk's new political party.
Well, I don't know who's joining his political party, and I don't know what values it represents, but at this point, I don't think anybody is. So, I know there's a certain amount of politicians that need money, and he can funnel them money, but starting a third party in the United States based around Elon's moral belief system is going to be an abject failure.
And, in response to this, we did see a pretty substantial drop for Tesla yesterday. They're down again today, not as significant right now. But we did see, the CEO quit today, giving no reason. And also we got a note from 27 major Tesla shareholders saying that they haven't set their annual shareholder meeting and they're approaching missing a legal deadline. So what has to happen for Tesla to regain investor trust after all of these things?
Well, what has to happen is almost irrelevant because it's just not going to happen. And what's happened is the whole company is basically hijacked by Elon Musk, the CEO, and the 13% owner of Tesla. So the other 87% of Tesla's ownership is not being represented. It's basically, completely ridiculous at this point that when we actually thought that maybe he'd go back to work at Tesla and focus on fixing the problems of the company, it's like, oh, well, Trump passed his bill, so I'm going to start a political party. It's the worst news for Tesla because a lot of its major initiatives like full self-driving and robotics, aren't really working and have a long way to go to even becoming profitable businesses for Tesla, and sales are going down the tubes. So, this is a really tough time for Tesla, and obviously Elon is, having issues, and he's not able to rationally think out what's best for him and the company, and it doesn't seem like there's anybody around him that can talk any sense into him. And, so that's where we're at. People jumping off the ship, and this ship is going into the rocks right now.
I'm sure you saw yesterday's note from Dan Ives over at Wedbush, where he had some thoughts for the board about what they should do going forward. And obviously, Elon's response gained some traction on social media and in the news. What are your thoughts about what Dan Ives suggested? And do you think that the board will execute on any of those?
Well, Dan is a real gentleman and an extremely nice guy, and I'm friends with him. I'm proud to say I'm friends with him because I really enjoy his company, and he's an incredibly intelligent person, and he's been one of the more bullish, positive people around Elon, and he's one of the few left. And to be so unprofessional to, granted his suggestions are kind of silly from Elon's perspective, to just say shut up or whatever, it's just like how many people can he turn off? Even his greatest supporters. And Dan's on TV every day. He's on TV more than me even. And all this guy does is try to tell a positive version of the Tesla story, and to attack him. I used to be one of the main, cheerleaders for Tesla for over a decade. And, I jumped off the ship a couple of years ago when I saw a lot of this happening when he purchased Twitter. And, quite frankly, there's nobody left on the Elon ship,
I think there's some small argument, despite Dan having thoughts about the management of Tesla. He's one of the most bullish Tesla observers that is around. He has a $500 price target on the stock, which I think is the highest projection of anyone. So it was an interesting person to alienate, especially since he's such a public figure. But I want to go back to the full self-driving commentary and bring in some talk about Robotaxi. Tesla's history with full self-driving and their issues is no secret. It's widely covered. They did finally get out their Robotaxi launch, but they were so far behind. Is there any world, Ross, in which they catch up with a Waymo or even potentially any of these Chinese EV companies?
Well, they certainly could. They have the basis of the software and the hardware that could work, but they need to accept the reality that Waymo has succeeded in solving robotaxi, and what are they doing that's working that Tesla isn't doing, and they need to adjust to that immediately, which is adding in more sensors and LiDAR to have a more precise picture of what's actually happening around you. The camera-only systems, in my mind, are never going to work, and certainly aren't going to work as good as a 29 sensor system that Waymo's using and all the other competitors. So there's a reason why every other competitor is using digital mapping and using lots of sensors, because I think Elon fundamentally doesn't understand how humans actually work. And so this is a big problem. If the CEO of the company doesn't actually have emotions and doesn't understand humans, but is trying to build a system to drive better than humans, he should kind of understand what's actually happening when a human's driving. And there's a lot going on actually in your brain when you're driving, and it's a lot more than just 8 eyes and a hard drive. So I think they need to make adjustments, and if they make adjustments and they can scale these changes very rapidly in their manufacturing processes, which they're good at, they could release a product that could compete in the next 5 years. But Waymo's moving ahead very, very fast. Their systems work. I use it. I'm constantly impressed at how well it works, and in very difficult driving here in LA, very challenging driving. So, we know that it can be solved, and Tesla can solve it if they copy the competitors.
And so you think the big differentiator for them getting from level 3 without having that safety driver in the car up to level 4 is doing a sensor change, just adopting some of the practices that are working for others?
100%. They're already digital mapping in Austin as well. They know that they need better and a more precise picture of what's happening on the roads. Every time you drive a road, you remember this road. I was just driving in Italy for 3 weeks, some of the most harrowing driving of my life. And I can tell you, the first time I drove down many of these roads, it was pretty scary. But the 5th or 6th time, you learn. And humans learn very quickly how to drive and how to adjust to the different variables that are happening around you when you're driving. And so having more sensors, having a larger suite of knowledge that can feed into this hard drive brain, it only makes it safer. I was using full self-driving yesterday on my Cybertruck, and I had to disengage, and the traffic stopped very quickly, and the truck just wasn't stopping with enough room. And that to me is a LiDAR issue. LiDAR can shoot out 1,000 feet and be very accurate at what distances are, but our eyes are not very good with distances, it turns out. And you can see that when people play golf and use rangefinders to see how far the hole is from where they're standing. So, Tesla just needs to accept reality that they need to make some adjustments to the hardware and the software that they have, and they can have a system that works and be a very viable business for them. But this hard-headed approach that my way is the only way, and my way will work and everybody else is wrong, at some point you got to reassess if that's accurate.
I'm so curious, despite everything that you just said about Tesla and your thoughts about Elon Musk, you drive a Cybertruck. You are a Tesla owner.
Yeah, I've been a Tesla owner for a long time, and I sort of feel sad about what's happened to the Tesla brand, and in some of my mind, I try to deny, the negative consequences of driving a Tesla because I just don't care. And I kind of like my Cybertruck too, but, honestly, I'm ready to sell it in some ways just because there's just nothing about Tesla that aligns with who I am anymore. And I don't want to be associated with Elon in any way, to be honest. So, it's a hard position to be in because I love Tesla as a company. I've seen Tesla grow up from selling, 40,000 cars to 2 million cars. And we put EVs on the road all around the world. And in some ways, it's just a fabulously successful story. But to see it now being run into the ground, and I've done everything I possibly can to, make changes or help that change or help Elon right the ship, but it just isn't getting fixed. And now I think it might be, with the new tax law changes and such, it might be beyond repair. So, it's sad. It makes me sad. And a lot of the things that I fought for in climate are being rolled back. It's 6-month anniversary of me surviving the Palisades fire and my family, and it fundamentally changed my entire life. And And I've seen climate and what the damage climate change can do firsthand. We see a huge tragedy here in Texas. It's just a massive tragedy, also climate related. It's like how much of this is going to happen. And Tesla was a solution for that. So to see these solutions going backwards is really disappointing for me. And a lot of that is because of Elon.
Certainly, and you know, their vehicle sales are down. They're on track to have their second straight year of declining sales. And as we've talked about them, we've only talked about them as a car company. But there's this ongoing conversation that they shouldn't be called a car company anymore. They are a tech company. Where do you stand on that? Are they still a car company, or are they a tech company, and that's where their future is?
Well, they've always been a tech company that built EVs, and EVs are their most successful and best business at the moment, and it represents 95% of their sales and profits. So, you know, it's a tech company that sells a lot of cars, but to, you know, when you look at the future technology they're building, it's not ready and it won't be profitable for some time. So they're sort of hamstrung by their own success in EVs. I mean, selling $90 billion worth of EVs is a wonderful problem, right? But, you know, they have to make new products, and they have new products like Robotaxi and the robot, but they have a lot of issues. And as I said, I think it'll be a long, you know, Robotaxi is a super competitive business, and I think it'll be a long time before we have robots walking around and working in our houses and stuff. So, you know, there's a realistic part of this that we have to sell cars on the short, medium term, and people have to want to buy your cars, and you have to create an environment that helps it go. And what we're doing is the exact opposite. So Elon just doesn't seem to care whether people buy his products or not anymore.
A story I'm sure we will continue to talk about, and I'm sure we'll talk about it with you, Ross. Thanks for being with us this afternoon.